Buddhist science is a study on Buddhism based on facts and science.
What is a mind? By Venerable Rungruang Papatsaro, Dr. Rungruang Limchoopatipa. Among the two components of life, body and mind, a mind is considered as the most important part. Therefore, in order to understand what a life is, then we have to study on the mind first. And in the ancient time, the only way to understand how a life is, by having an insight observation on how a mind functions, so-called, a mind processing under the law of cause and effect. Studying on the truths of the mind is considered as a key success factor in understanding the life, and the wisdom gained from the study will be applied in correcting the mind processing rightly. In the second part of the threefold study strategy in Buddhism, the Buddha suggested to have a study on a mind to have an insight observation on the mind, and the third part of the strategy to have a study on wisdom to learn how to develop wisdom and to apply the wisdom to improve the quality of the mind as follows. In Buddhism, everyone has to study in threefold of study, that is, the study on morality, the study on a mind, the mind science of the knowledge about the mind, and the study on the wisdom in the threefold study strategy for mind development. Therefore, the Buddha was the first one who introduced the mind science to the world in the ancient time of more than 2,600 years ago. What makes the Buddhism so very interesting, is the fact that the Buddhism is an only religion based on insight knowledge of the mind. In Buddhism, a mind or a spirit is an abstract part of life which is complemented by the physical part of body. Although the mind is an abstract part of life which cannot be easily seen with human eye, but everyone can experience an individual mind, so everyone has a functioning mind to be studied. The next most important requirement in this study is to learn on how to use a mindfulness as a tool for the insight observation in the Buddhist practice. The mind as a mind processing starts with interfacing with the world at the six sense bases, then the mind will function in various processing formations depending on an information of individuality before responding back to the world. Amazingly, in the ancient time, the Buddha realized that the mind was a mind processing, not a self of being someone. The mind is considered as a most important part of life because the mind will instruct the body to do whatsoever in responding to the world, and as a result the mind is acting as a boss of the body. The Buddha's teachings about the mind are the descriptions of what happening of a mind in accord to the law of cause and effect. There is no magical phenomenon in the mind, but it is a natural processing of mind. And by studying the mind, then understanding the cause of problems within the processing, and then knowing the way to resolve all the problems rightly. In Buddhism, a developed mind from the study on mind and the wisdom development are the most important achievement in life, so-called a noble person. The Buddha explained that the mind had four unique special capabilities in a cognitive process as follows.
A life as a formation of component-wise includes body, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, or as from a processing-wise in the process of dependent origination includes six sense bases: contact, feeling, craving, clinging, existence, birth, aging, death, ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, name and form. The truth in nature is that all of them are elements as parts of a nature which are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self. The mind has four cognitive properties in nature, that is, when incorporating with wholesomeness, of which these capabilities of mind are very beneficial in life development as follows. 1. Life is a stream of consciousness. When having a consciousness, the mind can acknowledge on what is happening around. Thus this is the truth of the first fundamental capability of mind in acknowledging and learning capability as a cognitive process of mind. Sometimes, this capability is called the element of acknowledgement. 2. The mind can accumulate and memorize on any receiving information as memory storage, and by having mindfulness learning on wholesomeness, the mind will gain wisdom on the truths of life within nature. This is a capability of mind to gain and retain the knowledge as wisdom. 3. The mind has a capability to execute on an arising mental phenomenon within the mind. And by having mindfulness to bring in this wholesome knowledge of wisdom, then the mind is able to abandon any arising troubling mind by wisdom. 4. And as a result of having the right execution and processing of the mind, thus the mind is capable to be liberated from all arising problems, and this is a liberation of life from suffering of all kinds of problems in the world.
The Buddha explained the four capabilities of mind in mind processing as, when having a consciousness the mind will acknowledge an arrived mental object and capable to know the truth of the object of consciousness, then absorbing the mental object to gain a knowledge or wisdom of what is going on, then the mind will abandon this object of consciousness, saying not to attach to it. And if the mind can completely release the received mental object without incurring the five aggregated subject to cling, then the mind is liberated. That is, the mind is free up from any involvement with the world. In improving the quality of life, the focus in Buddhist study is aiming to the mind. And most of the Buddha teachings are about the mind, including the components of mind, the mind processing, the cause and effect in mind processing, what process causes an effect of a certain state of mind, what is an error or problem in mind processing, and how we can manage to maneuver a mind processing, etc. In Buddhism, the study on the mind is considered as the second part in the threefold study strategy after the study on morality, and the study on mind is so important that only after then, we can gain an insight wisdom. In terms of component-wise, the mind consists of four aggregates of components, namely a group of feeling, a group of perception, a group of volitional formations, thinking, and a stream of consciousness. At a first glance it is a stream of consciousness that causes a various mental phenomenon happening within the mind. The Buddhism explains that these phenomena are natural on-off phenomena that are caused by certain causes and effects, beginning with a process starting with receiving a stimulus from the world at the six sense bases, and then processing within the mind in various processing before responding back to the stimulus by instructing the body to take a certain action to the world. It is apparent that the matter of what a person can be either good or bad really depending on how the mind processing, saying whether it is in the right or wrong pathway. In Buddhism, the study about a body is quite simple because it is tangible, while the study on the part of a mind is a very complicated one. In study on the mind, Buddhism introduces an insight observation approach to see on the arising mental phenomena. In Buddhist study on the mind, we will investigate into the insight study in the following subjects. A consciousness and its mechanism of mind in receiving, absorbing, and responding to the object of consciousness. A life is defined as a stream of consciousness, and the mechanism of consciousness is a detailed description of how a stream of consciousness causes a series of various states of mind processing. The Buddhist discovery on how a consciousness functioning as a natural mechanism is a breakthrough understanding on the mind studying in an ancient time. The role of mindfulness in an insight observation. When mentioning about performing an insight observation on mental phenomenon, it is very important to understand a special state of mindfulness and its role in performing an insight observation. The Buddha used the mindfulness meditation to purify the quality of mindfulness for insight observations. Without having a clear understanding of the role of mindfulness, it is almost impossible to perform the insight observations in Buddhist practice. The duality realizations of the reality of mind in terms of process and state. It is very interesting that the Buddhism describes a mind in terms of the duality descriptions from observations on mind of 89 types of processing pathways with associated 52 states of mental factors. That is, a mind is processing in a specific pathway, process, then arising an associated mental factor, state, along with that specific pathway. The Buddhist classifications in various types of processing pathways and mental factors can later be explained in the Human Connectome project. The 6 sense bases as the beginning of mind processing. In Buddhism, a mind is stimulated by the world. The 6 sense bases are common channels interfacing a mind with the world. An individual sense organ, as a sensing consciousness, typically initiates a mind processing within the mind. In this context, the 6 sense bases provide a basis for a schematic diagram on how the mind functions in mind processing. In a recent research study on Human Connectome, scientists discover various paths of mind processing called structural connectome in the nervous system. The process of dependent origination, acting as an operating system of mind. What probably the greatest discovery of the Buddha on the day of enlightenment was the discovery of the pattern of mind processing in terms of a sequence of cause and effect of the mind operating system. And by understanding of the mind processing in details, then we can contemplate on the cause of mental error or defilement arising within the mind, and as a result we can manage to subdue and to eliminate the arising defilement from the mind successfully. The 3 common characteristics of any objects of consciousness in relation to the 5 aggregates of being are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self. In Buddhism, not only we will investigate on an individual mental phenomenon, but also we extend into each a part of the 5 aggregate of being, and making a further investigation into the process of dependent origination, and then we can conclude that they all are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self as well. This is another way to conclude that a life is no self. The objective of the Buddhist practice is to perform an insight observation on the mind. This study reveals remarkable knowledge on how do we view and understand the world. What really making the Buddhism a scientific study, is the pragmatic insight observation on the behaviors of mind. The insight on the mind with mindfulness is a breakthrough discovery that makes the Buddhism as a religion based on observations, which leads the way to insight discovery of the truths of life within nature. Although the mind is no self which is beyond anyone control, however, the Buddha discovered that by having a mindfulness, then by having this mindfulness perform an insight observation on the mental phenomena in the Buddhist practice to initiate a cognitive development within the mind to gain insight wisdom. After then we can manage to incorporate the mindfulness with gain wisdom to cope with any arising internal phenomena rightly at all times. In Buddhism, this whole introspective learning process is called the mind development.